It was supposed to be the perfect Thanksgiving. Golden turkey, happy family, and a loving husband. But behind the smiles, Jessica was hiding bruises. That night, her husband walked through the door, not alone, but with his pregnant mistress. What happened next would shatter her body, her home, and her heart. He broke his pregnant wife's leg, right at the dinner table. But what he didn't know was that her father, a former Marine, had just arrived. What followed was a battle more brutal than any war Jessica had ever reported from. Stay with me, because what happens after this will make you scream, cry, and maybe even believe in justice again. And when you're done, don't forget, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. The warm glow of the Manhattan penthouse felt like a museum display, beautiful, expensive, and completely lifeless. Jessica Hartford stood at the kitchen island, her hands trembling as she basted the golden turkey for the fourth time. The smell of rosemary and butter filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of the vanilla candles she'd lit throughout the apartment. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Central Park stretched below like a postcard, the November afternoon painting everything in shades of amber and gray. Somewhere out there, families were gathering, laughing, creating memories. Inside her pristine home, Jessica was alone. She glanced at her phone. 4:30 in the afternoon. Marcus had promised to be home by 3. She'd called him 6 times. 6 times straight to voicemail. Her 2-year-old daughter Lily sat in her playpen, stacking blocks with chubby fingers, blonde curls bouncing as she hummed to herself. At least one of them was happy. Jessica's hand moved unconsciously to her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant with their son. She should have been glowing with working, surrounded by family, planning the future. Instead, she felt like she was drowning in a glass box. Everyone could see her, but no one could hear her screaming. The bracelet on her wrist caught the light. Cartier, 18-karat gold, a gift from Marcus last month. She adjusted it carefully, making sure it covered the bruise underneath. 5 days old now, fading from purple to yellow-green. She'd bumped into the counter, she told herself. Just clumsy pregnancy brain. The lie tasted bitter. Her phone buzzed, finally. But it wasn't Marcus. Unknown number. He's going to hurt you tonight. Leave now. Jessica's breath caught. Her finger hovered over the delete button. This was the 3rd message this week. Different numbers each time. She should tell Marcus. She should call the police. But something in her gut, that same instinct that had kept her alive in Fallujah when her press convoy took enemy fire, told her these messages were warnings, not threats. She deleted it anyway. Checked the locks on the door. Again. The apartment suddenly felt too big, too quiet. Jessica walked to the mantel, studying the photos arranged there like evidence in a trial. Her wedding day, Marcus in his perfect tuxedo, that smile that made senators and CEOs write checks without reading the fine print. Their honeymoon in Santorini, Lily's birth, and one older photo tucked behind the others. Jessica in combat fatigues, standing with her press crew outside Fallujah. 3 colleagues who'd laughed with her that morning. 3 colleagues who died that afternoon when the IED ripped through their vehicle. She'd survived. Barely. The PTSD diagnosis came later, along with the nightmares, the panic attacks, the feeling that she'd used up all her luck and was living on borrowed time. That's when she'd met Marcus Hartford. Charming, successful, stable. Everything the war had stolen from her. He'd pursued her relentlessly, promised her safety, security, a family. She'd believed him because she desperately needed to believe in something. 5 years later, she was still trying to convince herself she'd made the right choice. The doorbell rang. Jessica froze. Marcus had a key. He never rang the bell. She checked the security camera. A man in marine dress blues stood in the hallway holding grocery bags and a bouquet of flowers. Silver hair cropped military short, face weathered by decades of sun and stress, eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. Her father, Colonel Frank Bishop, retired Marine, 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 in Iraq, recipient of the Silver Star, functional alcoholic. The man who'd shown up drunk to her wedding and called Marcus a dead-eyed psychopath wearing a Brooks Brothers mask. The man she hadn't spoken to in 8 years. Jessica's hands shook as she reached for the doorknob. Part of her wanted to pretend she wasn't home, but Lily had already heard the bell, was already toddling toward the door, calling out in her sweet baby voice. She opened it. Frank's eyes met hers. Decades of pain, regret, and stubborn hope packed into that single look. "Hi, sweetheart," he said quietly. "I know you said not to come, but it's Thanksgiving, and Lily deserves to know her grandfather." Before Jessica could respond, Lily squeezed past her legs. "Grandpa!" The little girl threw her arms up, and Frank's tough guy facade crumbled. He set down the bags and scooped her up, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Hey there, princess," he whispered. "Look how big you got." Jessica's throat tightened. She'd been showing Lily photos of Frank for months, unable to completely sever that connection despite everything. Family was family, even when it was broken. "You can't just show up here," Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. Frank set Lily down gently, pulling something from his pocket. An AA chip, 14 months sober, the inscription read. "I'm not the man who ruined your wedding," and he said, "I got help, real help. I'm trying, Jess. You told my husband he had dead eyes at the altar in front of 300 people. I was drunk," Frank admitted. "I was also right." Before Jessica could respond, her phone rang. FaceTime. Marcus. She answered, turning the screen so Marcus could see Frank in the background. For just a fraction of a second, so brief Jessica almost missed it, Marcus's perfect smile faltered. His eyes went cold, calculating. Then the charm snapped back into place like a mask. "Colonel Bishop, what a wonderful surprise," Marcus said, his voice warm as bourbon. "I wish I could be there to welcome you properly, but I'm stuck at the office. Big client emergency. I'll be home by 8, I promise." He hung up before anyone could respond. Frank's jaw tightened. "That man's lying. I interrogated terrorists for a living, Jessica. I know what lies look like." "You don't know him," Jessica said defensively, but her voice wavered. "He's good to us. He provides everything." Frank's eyes dropped to her wrist, where the bracelet had shifted, revealing the edge of the bruise. "Jessica," she yanked her sleeve down. "I bumped into the counter. It's nothing. Drop it." Lily tugged on Frank's pants. "Grandpa stay for turkey?" Frank looked at Jessica, silently asking permission. She should say no, should protect the fragile peace she'd built. But the apartment was so quiet, so empty, and the idea of spending another Thanksgiving alone with a toddler while her husband worked late made her want to scream. "Fine," she said, "but if Marcus is uncomfortable when he gets home, I'll leave," Frank promised. "Scout's honor." Jessica almost laughed. Frank had never been a scout. He'd been a Marine through and through, which meant he followed orders but interpreted them creatively. She let him in anyway. What else could she do? The turkey was getting cold. Her daughter was already chattering excitedly to her grandfather. And somewhere in the back of her mind, that survival instinct was whispering that when the unknown texter said Marcus would hurt her tonight, having a retired Marine colonel in the house might not be the worst thing. She just didn't know yet how right that instinct would prove to be. Frank carried his grocery bags to the kitchen, while Lily clung to his leg, chattering about her toys, her books, everything a 2-year-old found fascinating. Jessica watched her daughter's joy and felt something crack inside her chest, a reminder of what family could be when it wasn't performed for Instagram or carefully managed to maintain appearances. "You didn't have to bring anything," Jessica said, unpacking the bags. "Sweet potatoes, fresh cranberries, a bottle of sparkling cider." "Can't show up to Thanksgiving empty-handed," Frank replied. "Your mother would haunt me." The mention of her mother hung in the air like smoke. Susan Bishop had died 10 years ago. Car accident, they'd told Jessica. Quick, painless. A lie she'd believed because sometimes lies were easier than truth. Frank rolled up his sleeves, revealing tattoos Jessica remembered from childhood. An eagle, globe, and anchor on his forearm, coordinates on his wrist from every place the Marines had sent him home. His hands, scarred and steady despite his age, began peeling sweet potatoes with practiced efficiency. "You don't have to help," Jessica protested weakly. "Marines don't sit idle," Frank said. "Besides, you're 7 months pregnant and limping. When did you hurt your leg?" "I didn't." "You're favoring your right side. I've seen enough combat injuries to know when someone's in pain." Jessica's defenses crumbled slightly. It's nothing, just pregnancy makes you clumsy. I've been bumping into things. Frank didn't respond, but his jaw tightened as he focused intently on the sweet potatoes. Jessica recognized that look. It was the same expression he'd worn when she was 16 and came home with a black eye, claiming she'd walked into a locker. He'd known she was lying then too, but she'd begged him not to make it worse. He'd taught her self-defense instead. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kitchen filling with the homey sense of cooking. Lily played nearby, building towers and knocking them down, each crash followed by delighted giggles. She looks like you did at that age, Frank said quietly. Same stubborn chin. She has Marcus's eyes, Jessica replied automatically, the defensive reflex so ingrained she didn't even think about it. She has your spirit, Frank countered. That's what matters. Jessica's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Running a bit later. Maybe 8:30. Order something for yourself if you're hungry. She stared at the message, feeling that familiar mixture of disappointment and relief. Part of her had hoped that this Thanksgiving would be different. The other part knew that hoping for change from Marcus was like hoping for rain in a drought. Technically possible, but increasingly unlikely. He's not coming, is he? Frank asked, reading her expression. He said 8:30. Which means what? 9, 10, never? Dad, stop. I'm just saying, you've been here 45 minutes. You don't get to judge my marriage. Frank set down the peeler, meeting her eyes. I judged it 8 years ago at your wedding, when I saw how he looked at you when he thought no one was watching. Like you were a possession he'd acquired, a trophy. You were drunk. Drunk doesn't mean wrong. Before Jessica could respond, her phone rang again. This time, Marcus wanted to FaceTime. She answered, forcing brightness into her voice. Hey, how's the client emergency? Marcus's face filled the screen, his office visible behind him. Dark wood, leather chairs, the Hartford Security Systems logo on the wall. Everything designed to project power and trustworthiness. It's a nightmare, he said, running his hand through his perfect hair. The Pentagon's breathing down my neck about the new surveillance software. But I'm thinking of you, babe. How's Thanksgiving prep? Good, Dad's helping. Oh? Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. That's nice. He could see Frank in the background, methodically chopping vegetables. The two men locked eyes through the screen, an entire conversation happening in silence. Well, give the Colonel my regards, Marcus said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I'll be home as soon as I can. Love you. The screen went dark before Jessica could respond. He's not coming, Frank repeated. You don't know that. Jessica, please, Dad, just let's have a nice dinner. You, me, and Lily. Can we do that without analyzing my life? Frank studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, sweetheart, yeah, we can do that. They finished cooking together, falling into the rhythm of 1,000 meals they'd shared before everything fell apart. Frank told stories about his fellow Marines, carefully edited versions that made Lily laugh. Jessica found herself relaxing, the tension in her shoulders easing. By 6 o'clock, the table was set. China Jessica had received as wedding gifts and used maybe 3 times. Crystal glasses, cloth napkins, the turkey golden and perfect in the center of the table, surrounded by all the traditional sides. It looked like a magazine spread. Picture-perfect Thanksgiving. Jessica took a photo, considered posting it to Instagram, then set her phone down. What was the point? Her followers didn't need to see another carefully curated image of a life that didn't exist. They ate dinner, the 3 of them. Lily in her high chair, making a glorious mess of mashed potatoes. Frank across from Jessica, treating the meal with the same focused attention he brought to everything. Jessica at the head of the table where Marcus should have been sitting, feeling the weight of his absence like a physical thing. This is nice, Frank said quietly. Just us. Jessica nodded, not trusting her voice. I'm sorry, Frank continued, for everything, for the drinking, for your mother, for not being the father you deserved. Dad, let me say this. I've been working with my sponsor for 14 months, doing the steps, making amends, and the biggest amend I owe is to you. Tears pricked Jessica's eyes. You don't have to. I do, because you deserve better. You deserved a father who showed up sober, who protected you instead of becoming another thing you had to protect yourself from. And I'm sorry, Jessica. I'm so damn sorry. She reached across the table, taking his weathered hand. I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago. Then why haven't we talked in 8 years? Because forgiveness doesn't mean I wasn't hurt, or that I don't have boundaries now. Frank nodded slowly. That's fair. That's more than fair. They were still holding hands when the elevator chimed. Jessica's heart jumped. She pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of how this looked. Her estranged father, dinner for three, Marcus's empty chair. The elevator doors opened. Marcus Hartford stepped out, immaculate in his charcoal suit, his smile warm and apologetic. And behind him, in a dress so red it practically screamed for attention, was Vanessa Cole. Jessica's blood turned to ice. Sorry I'm late, babe, Marcus said casually, as if bringing another woman to Thanksgiving dinner was perfectly normal. This is Vanessa, my executive assistant. She didn't have anywhere to go tonight, and I couldn't leave her alone on Thanksgiving. You don't mind, do you? Jessica's mouth opened, but no words came out. She stared at the woman standing in her home, mid-20s, beautiful, wearing a diamond bracelet Jessica had never seen before, but somehow knew cost more than her wedding ring. Frank stood slowly, his marine posture making him seem taller, more dangerous. His eyes moved between Marcus and Vanessa, reading body language, proximity, the thousand tiny signals that screamed what they were pretending not to be. Nice to meet you, Vanessa, Frank said evenly. I'm Frank Bishop, Jessica's father. You work closely with Marcus? Very closely, Vanessa replied, her hand touching Marcus's arm with easy familiarity. We spend so much time together. Business trips to Singapore, Dubai. I honestly don't know what I'd do without him. The words landed like grenades. Jessica finally found her voice. You brought your assistant to our Thanksgiving dinner? She had nowhere else to go, Marcus repeated, his tone suggesting Jessica was being unreasonable. It's the charitable thing to do. He moved past her to the table, Vanessa following. They sat down side by side, Marcus pulling out her chair like they were on a date. Jessica remained standing, her brain struggling to process what was happening. This wasn't an affair being hidden. This was an affair being flaunted. Marcus wasn't even trying to pretend. Frank's hand touched her elbow gently. You okay? She wasn't, but she nodded anyway, moving robotically to the table, serving food with mechanical precision while her world tilted sideways. And that's when Marcus's phone, sitting face up on the table, lit up with a text message. From V. Can't wait to tell her about our baby tonight. Vanessa was sitting right there, texting Marcus, while sitting next to him. Jessica's vision tunneled. The room seemed to shrink until all she could see was that message, those words, that heart emoji mocking everything she'd believed about her life. You're pregnant, she whispered. Vanessa smiled, cool, confident, victorious. 12 weeks, she said. We were going to tell you after dessert, but since you saw the text. Time seemed to stop. Jessica could hear her own heartbeat, feel the baby in her belly kick as if sensing her distress, see Lily's confused face as her mother stood frozen, shaking. And then something inside her snapped. She grabbed her wine glass, still full, untouched, and threw the contents in Vanessa's face. The next few seconds would change everything. The red wine dripped down Vanessa's face, staining her dress. Her surprise genuine for just a moment before her expression shifted to something calculating, predatory. Her hand moved to her phone, already recording. Did you see that? Vanessa's voice rang out, loud enough for the phone to catch every word. She attacked me. This woman is crazy. She just assaulted me in her own home. Marcus moved fast, too fast. The transition from charming CEO to something darker happened in a heartbeat. His hand locked around Jessica's wrist, the same wrist with the hidden bruise, and twisted. Pain shot up Jessica's arm like lightning. She screamed, tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. You embarrassed me, Marcus hissed, his perfect mask finally dropping. In front of a guest, in front of your father. How dare you? He shoved her. Jessica stumbled backward, her pregnant belly throwing off her balance. She hit the edge of the dining table hard before falling to the marble floor. Her leg twisted underneath her body at an unnatural angle. The crack echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. For a second, there was complete silence. Then Lily started screaming, high-pitched, terrified cries that seemed to come from somewhere far away. Jessica tried to move to get to her daughter, but white-hot agony exploded from her leg. "My leg," she gasped. "Marcus, the baby." She looked up at her husband, hoping to see concern, regret, anything human. Instead, Marcus stood over her, straightening his chin, his face cold and blank. Then something changed in the air. A presence controlled and dangerous. Frank moved with combat precision. One moment he was across the room, the next he had Marcus face down on the dining table, arm twisted behind his back in a restraint hold perfected through decades of military training. 3 seconds. That's all it took. "You just assaulted a pregnant woman." Frank's voice was deadly calm. "In front of a witness. In front of your daughter." "He attacked Marcus!" Vanessa's voice cut through the tension. Her phone was still recording, angled carefully to make it look like Frank was the aggressor. "You all saw it. The drunk father attacked him." Frank's free hand moved to his breast pocket. "I've been recording since you walked in. Every word. Every action." Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. Even pinned to the table. "New York's a two-party consent state, old man. Your recording's inadmissible. You think a jarhead knows the law better than my attorneys?" "Don't move your leg," Frank said to Jessica, maintaining his hold on Marcus. "I'm calling 911. "You stupid old drunk," Marcus's voice dripped with contempt. "You think you're the hero. I own this city. That phone she's filming with? My company makes the surveillance software. The 911 system? Hartford Security Systems runs it. The cops about to arrive? I donate $50,000 annually to their union. Your daughter? Check the prenup. She's mine. This house? Mine. The bank accounts? Mine." Each word was a hammer blow. Jessica lay on the cold marble, her legs screaming, her unborn baby kicking frantically, listening to her husband explain exactly how trapped she was. "You can't help her," Marcus continued, that cold smile back on his face. "No one can. She's mine, and she'll do exactly what I tell her." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "Daddy!" Lily's terrified voice cut through everything. "Daddy, Mama's bleeding." Jessica looked down. Blood, not from her leg, lower, the fall, the stress. Oh God, the baby. "Ambulance," she whispered, "please. The baby." 2 police officers entered, clearly familiar with Marcus, their handshakes friendly, casual. Frank reluctantly released Marcus, who immediately straightened his suit and shifted into his public persona. "Officers, thank God you're here." Marcus's voice was perfect. Concerned husband, reasonable man, dealing with an unreasonable situation. "My wife had a psychiatric episode. She attacked my colleague with wine, and when I tried to calm her, she fell. Her father, who has a history of alcoholism, then assaulted me." He showed them Vanessa's video, which had been carefully edited to start at the wine throw, cutting out everything that came before. "Sir, we need you to step outside," one officer said to Frank. "She needs an ambulance. Her leg is broken." Frank's voice rose. "Already called private medical transport," Marcus said smoothly. "She's going to Lenox Hill, our family hospital. I'll ride with her. Make sure she gets the best care." Frank was being escorted out, but he caught Jessica's eyes, mouthed, "I'm not leaving you." Paramedics arrived with a stretcher, professional, efficient, loading Jessica carefully while she bit back screams of pain. Marcus climbed into the ambulance with her, playing the devoted husband for the witnesses. As the door started to close, he leaned close to her ear, voice barely a whisper. "You stupid bitch. You should have just smiled and eaten your turkey. Now you'll lose everything." The ambulance doors slammed shut. Through the small window, Jessica saw her penthouse growing smaller, saw Frank being held back by the officers, saw Vanessa standing in the doorway with Lily on her hip, waving goodbye, waving like a mother seeing off a guest. And Jessica realized with perfect crystal clarity that this wasn't an affair that had gotten out of control. This was a plan, carefully orchestrated, perfectly executed. She'd walked into a trap, and she hadn't even seen it closing around her. The ambulance turned the corner, and her old life disappeared from view. Lenox Hill Hospital's emergency room was a controlled chaos of beeping machines, hurrying staff, and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Jessica lay on a gurney, her leg immobilized in a temporary splint, each heartbeat sending fresh waves of pain through her body. "Mrs. Hartford?" A doctor approached, her badge-reading doctor. "Rachel Stevens." She had kind eyes, tired around the edges. "I'm going to examine your leg. Can you tell me your pain level?" 9, Jessica gasped. "Maybe 10. And the baby, please check the baby." Dr. Stevens' hands were gentle as she examined Jessica's leg. "The fetal monitor shows a strong heartbeat, but this leg, you have a tibial plateau fracture. It needs surgery within 6 hours or you risk permanent damage." Hope flickered in Jessica's chest. "Then do it. Please, just do the surgery." Dr. Stevens hesitated, her expression uncomfortable. "I need consent from your medical power of attorney." "That's me. I consent. According to your hospital records, your husband holds your medical power of attorney. He's—" Dr. Stevens glanced toward the waiting area where Marcus was speaking with the hospital administrator. "He's refusing surgery." The words didn't make sense. "What? No, I want the surgery. My leg—" "Mr. Hartford is citing concerns about anesthetic risks to the fetus. He's requesting conservative treatment instead. Cast, elevation, monitoring." "That's not his decision." Jessica tried to sit up, but pain lanced through her. "Doctor, please. You can see what's happening here. He did this to me. He pushed me. He broke my leg, and now he won't let you fix it?" Dr. Stevens' eyes filled with something like pity. "Mrs. Hartford, I believe you, but legally your husband has the authority." "That's not fair. That's not—" Jessica's voice broke into sobs. Marcus entered, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive suits. The hospital administrator followed, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Sweetheart," Marcus's voice was honey smooth, but his eyes were cold. "You're not thinking clearly. The surgery poses risks to our son, our baby. We need to protect him first." "My leg," Jessica whispered. "Marcus, please. It'll heal wrong. I'll never walk right again." "Dr. Stevens," Marcus addressed the physician directly, dismissing Jessica's pleas entirely. "My wife has a history of post-traumatic stress disorder from her time as a war correspondent. She was diagnosed with PTSD in 2013. She's not in a state to make rational medical decisions." One of his lawyers stepped forward, presenting documents. "We're requesting a psychiatric evaluation before any major medical procedures are authorized." "No," Jessica breathed. "No, don't." But a nurse was already bringing forms. Marcus signed them with a flourish, then guided Jessica's hand to the signature line. "Just sign, Jessica. It's for your own good." The pain was so intense she could barely see. She signed because she didn't have the strength to fight, because every second without pain medication felt like being torn apart, because she couldn't think past the agony in her leg and the terror for her baby. 30 minutes later, a psychiatrist arrived, Dr. Philip Brennan. He had the look of someone who'd been paid well to ask specific questions. "Mrs. Hartford, I understand you served as embedded press in Iraq and Afghanistan from 2007 to 2012? Jessica nodded, wary. "And you were diagnosed with PTSD in 2013? "Yes, but I've been managing it. Therapy, medication when needed. I'm fine." "Have you ever experienced suicidal ideation?" The question hit like a physical blow. "That was years ago. After my press unit was hit by an IED, 3 of my colleagues died. I had survivor's guilt, but I got help." "So you've considered suicide?" "Once, over a decade ago, but that's not—" "Current medications?" "Prenatal vitamins. Sometimes Xanax for panic attacks, but rarely." "How frequently?" "Maybe twice a month. Less." "So you're self-medicating anxiety with benzodiazepines while pregnant?" Each answer was a trap, every honest response twisted into evidence of instability. Jessica watched her own words being weaponized against her, powerless to stop it. Dr. Brennan's diagnosis came swiftly. Given the acute stress, documented history of PTSD, past suicidal ideation, current medication use, and tonight's violent outburst, I'm recommending 72-hour psychiatric observation. Violent outburst? Jessica's voice rose. I threw wine at the woman who's sleeping with my husband, who's pregnant with his baby. That's not mental illness. That's a normal reaction to. Your elevated state confirms my assessment, Dr. Brennan said calmly. This is for your safety, Mrs. Hartford. Dr. Stevens, please, Jessica begged the ER physician. Don't let them do this. Dr. Stevens looked genuinely pained. I'm sorry. In cases like this, psychiatry overrules orthopedics. I don't have the authority. They transferred Jessica to the psychiatric wing, her legs still untreated, still screaming with pain. The ward had safety glass windows, soft rooms, and the particular quiet that comes from heavily sedated patients. Through her window, Jessica could see the parking lot, watched Marcus carrying Lily to his car. Her daughter was crying, reaching back toward the hospital. Mama! Mama! Marcus saw Jessica watching, and he smiled. Actually smiled, then made Lily wave her little hand. Vanessa appeared, sliding into the passenger seat with easy familiarity. Playing house, playing family. With Jessica's daughter. Jessica screamed, pounded on the safety glass window. An orderly appeared behind her. Mrs. Hartford, you need to calm down, or we'll have to sedate you. She kept screaming, kept pounding. The injection came swift and cold. The world tilted sideways, colors bleeding together. Jessica's last conscious thought was of Lily's face, confused and terrified, disappearing as the car pulled away. When she woke 18 hours later, she was strapped to the bed with soft restraints for her safety. Her phone sat on the bedside table, deliberately placed where she could see it but not reach it. The screen lit up with notifications. Family court emergency hearing. Missed. Diane Morrison, where are you? Judge ruled in Marcus's favor. Marcus, Lily's asking for mommy. I told her you're too sick. Hope you get better soon, hearts. Jessica closed her eyes and realized with perfect clarity that she'd just lost everything. Her daughter, her freedom, her life. And the man who'd orchestrated all of it was probably tucking Lily into bed right now, reading her a bedtime story, acting like the devoted father while his pregnant mistress watched from the doorway. The American dream, picture-perfect family, built on the ruins of the family he'd destroyed. Frank Bishop sat in a motel room in Queens that smelled of mildew and broken dreams. The place rented rooms by the hour, asked no questions, and took cash. It was all he could afford on his military pension. His laptop glowed in the darkness, email after email flying to old contacts. Former Marines who owed him favors, intelligence analysts he'd worked with in Baghdad, anyone who might have information on Hartford security systems. The responses came back terse and worried. Frank, that company's flagged. Can't tell you more. Above my clearance. Whatever you're digging into, drop it. These people are connected. I value my pension too much to help you with this one. Sorry, brother. Frank stared at the screen, feeling 62 years old and utterly useless. His daughter was locked in a psychiatric ward, and he was powerless to help her. His phone rang. Unknown number. Yeah? Colonel Bishop? A familiar voice. Agent Mitchell, someone Frank had worked with during his last tour in Iraq. Got your message. Meet me. 1 hour. The parking lot behind Saintham. Patrick's Cathedral. The line went dead. Frank grabbed his jacket and his concealed carry pistol. Technically illegal in New York, but he was past caring about technicalities. If Marcus Hartford owned the police, Frank needed to be prepared. The cathedral parking lot was empty at midnight, just scattered cars in the glow of streetlights. Agent Mitchell appeared from the shadows, looking older than Frank remembered. Grayer, more cautious. This is dangerous, Frank. You know that? My daughter's in danger. That trumps everything. Mitchell lit a cigarette, hands shaking slightly. Hartford Security Systems isn't just a defense contractor. It's a front. Marcus Hartford sells surveillance technology to sanctioned nations. Iran, North Korea, Syria. Tech that tracks dissidents, monitors opposition leaders. People die because of what he sells. Then why isn't he in prison? His father, Richard Hartford, former CIA, connected to everyone who matters. He has files on judges, senators, FBI brass, blackmail material going back decades. Every time we get close to making a case, evidence disappears. Witnesses recant. Warrants get denied. Frank's jaw clenched. So he's untouchable? I didn't say that, just protected. We've been investigating for 3 years, getting nowhere. My daughter is collateral damage, Mitchell said bluntly. I'm sorry, Frank, but some battles you can't win. Tell Jessica to sign whatever papers he wants, take whatever settlement she can get, and disappear. It's the only way she survives this. That's not acceptable. Then she's already lost. Mitchell dropped his cigarette, crushed it under his heel. There's one more thing you should know. Marcus's assistant, Vanessa Cole, she's FBI, undercover, has been for 18 months. Frank's blood ran cold. She set up my daughter. That whole Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be controlled. Vanessa was tasked with getting close to Marcus, gathering evidence. The assault on your daughter wasn't supposed to happen. Intel said Marcus was white-collar only, not violent. Intel was wrong, clearly. Mitchell looked genuinely troubled. Look, I shouldn't be telling you this, but Vanessa's op is targeting Richard, not Marcus. Marcus is small time compared to his father. If we arrest Marcus now on domestic violence, Richard vanishes. Lawyers spring Marcus in 48 hours. Everyone walks. How long until you have Richard? 6 weeks. We're doing a controlled delivery of surveillance tech to Syrian contacts. Richard has to personally verify the deal. Jessica doesn't have 6 weeks. Then help us speed it up. You've got access through military channels. Old contacts who don't answer to the people Richard owns. You help us nail Richard fast, we nail Marcus in the process. Your daughter gets justice. And if I don't? Mitchell met his eyes. Then your daughter stays locked up while Marcus gets permanent custody. Your choice, Colonel. He walked away, melting back into shadows. Frank stood alone in the parking lot, weighing impossible options. Help the FBI, potentially saving Jessica, or try to fight alone and guarantee her destruction. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. But this text made his heart stop. Colonel Bishop, we need to talk. Tonight. Vanessa Cole. An address followed. A different motel, even worse than Frank's. He drove there knowing it might be a trap. But he was a Marine. Marines ran toward danger, not away from it. Vanessa sat on the motel bed, still in the red dress from Thanksgiving, makeup smudged. She looked smaller, less predatory, almost human. Frank's hand rested on his concealed weapon. Give me one reason not to shoot you for what you did to my daughter. Because I can help her, Vanessa said quietly. Because I saw what Marcus did, and it wasn't supposed to go that way. Because I'm FBI, and if you shoot me, Jessica loses her only chance. She pulled out her badge, slowly. Special Agent Vanessa Cole, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Call this number. Ask for Assistant Director Warren. Verify I'm real. Frank made the call. It checked out. He hung up, not lowering his guard. You set her up. I got close to Marcus. That was my job. The Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to happen differently. I was supposed to provoke an argument. Get Marcus to reveal his control issues. Not that. She's in a psychiatric ward with a broken leg. She lost custody of her daughter. I know. Vanessa's voice cracked. And I'm sorry, but Marcus is a puppet. Richard Hartford is the real target. International arms dealer. Human trafficker. Money launderer. He has a network that spans 40 countries. If we take down Marcus now, Richard disappears. Everything we've built collapses. Jessica doesn't have 6 weeks. Then we speed it up. You have military contacts Richard can't touch. Help me gather evidence faster. We hit them both simultaneously. Jessica gets her life back. And if I don't, Vanessa's eyes were hard, then your daughter stays locked up while Marcus raises Lily with me playing mommy. He'll divorce Jessica, marry me for appearances, and your daughter will die in that psychiatric ward. Legally. Quietly. They'll call it suicide from PTSD. The threat was clear. Help or lose everything. Frank wanted to put his fist through the wall, but that wouldn't save Jessica. What do you need me to do? Vanessa pulled out a laptop. Richard has a vault at his Connecticut estate. Physical files on everyone he controls. Judges, politicians, woos. We get those files, we blow up his entire network. but the estate has security I can't bypass alone. When? This Saturday, Marcus is throwing his annual post-Thanksgiving party. 200 guests. Security will be spread thin. Frank looked at Vanessa, this woman who'd destroyed his daughter's life as part of an FBI operation, and made a choice he'd probably regret. I'm in, but if anything happens to Jessica, if this goes wrong and she gets hurt worse, then you can shoot me, Vanessa finished. Fair? Fair. They shook hands like enemies, agreeing to a temporary ceasefire. Outside, New York City hummed with late-night traffic, millions of people living their lives, completely unaware that in a Queens motel room, two people were planning a heist that would either save Jessica Hartford or destroy her completely. Frank just prayed he was making the right call. Jessica spent 7 days in the psychiatric ward, 7 days of group therapy sessions where she pretended to share feelings while frantically planning her next move, 7 days of medications that dulled her pain but also dulled her mind, 7 days watching her leg heal wrong in its cast because Marcus had refused the surgery. When they finally released her, Frank was waiting outside. They didn't speak during the drive. Jessica stared out the window at the city rushing past, feeling disconnected from everything. Frank's hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white. Where are we going? Jessica finally asked. My sister's place. Margaret said you could stay there. I can't go to my aunt's. Marcus thinks you're at a recovery facility. I told the hospital that's where I was taking you. Another lie, another deception. Jessica was drowning in lies. They pulled up to a small house in Brooklyn. Aunt Margaret appeared in the doorway, older than Jessica remembered. Her face creased with worry and something else. Something that looked like guilt. Jessica, sweetheart. Margaret wrapped her in a careful hug, mindful of the cast and crutches. Come inside. We need to talk. Frank's expression went dark. Maggie, don't. She deserves the truth, Frank. You should have told her years ago. Told me what? Jessica limped inside, exhaustion and pain making her voice sharp. Margaret led them to her living room, pulled out a worn folder from a drawer. Inside were documents Jessica had never seen before. Death certificates, medical records, a police report. Your mother, Margaret said gently. She didn't die in a car accident. The words didn't register at first. Jessica looked at Frank, waiting for him to correct his sister. But Frank's face had gone ashen, and he couldn't meet her eyes. What? Jessica whispered. Margaret handed her the death certificate. Cause of death, suicide, alcohol and barbiturates. Your father's drinking. Margaret's voice broke. Susan couldn't take it anymore. She tried to get him help, tried everything. But some people have to want to change, and Frank wasn't ready. So Jessica couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her mother. Suicide. Because of Frank's drinking. Is this true? She asked her father. Frank nodded, tears streaming down his weathered face. I was going to tell you. When I got sober, I swear I was going to explain everything. You killed her. The words erupted from Jessica like a physical thing. Your drinking killed her, and I married the same kind of man. I married Marcus because you made me think that was normal. Jessica, get out. You're just like him. You lie. You destroy. Get out of my life. Please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. Frank stumbled backward, broken by his daughter's fury. Margaret touched his arm, but he shook her off, walking out without another word. Jessica collapsed onto Margaret's couch, sobbing so hard she thought she might shatter. Her mother, her father, Marcus. Everyone she'd ever trusted had lied to her. The next morning brought fresh disaster. Jessica tried to access the ATM using her bank card. Account closed flashed on the screen. She tried another card. Declined. Panic rising, she called the bank, waded through automated menus with shaking hands. Mrs. Hartford, the representative said after verifying her identity. Your husband transferred all joint assets to offshore accounts yesterday. According to the prenuptial agreement you signed, he has full authority over marital finances during periods of your mental incapacity. Your recent psychiatric hospitalization triggered that clause. That can't be legal. I'm sorry, ma'am. You'll need to consult an attorney. Jessica hung up, checked her wallet, $53 in cash. That was everything. She called Diane Morrison, her best friend from college, now a divorce attorney. Diane, I need help. I need a lawyer. Diane's voice sounded thick, like she'd been crying. Jess, I'm so sorry. I showed up to that emergency custody hearing. Marcus had 3 attorneys, big firms. They buried me in motions. What happened? Judge awarded him temporary full custody. You're deemed unfit pending psychiatric clearance. The penthouse is in Richard Hartford's name. Always was. You were never on the lease. And your prenup? What about the prenup? It's ironclad. You signed away everything. Jessica remembered signing that document 5 years ago. Marcus's lawyers had presented it as standard procedure. She'd been so in love, so trusting. She'd signed without reading. Help me fight this, Jessica begged. I will, but my firm requires a $50,000 retainer for cases involving clients like the Hartfords. Without that, I have $53. Silence on the line. I'm sorry, Jess. I'm so sorry. The final catastrophe came that afternoon. Social services called. They'd arranged a supervised visit with Lily. 1 hour. Jessica could see her daughter for 1 hour. She arrived at the facility on crutches, her leg throbbing, her heart racing with desperate hope. A social worker led her to a cheerful room filled with toys. Lily was playing with a new doll, expensive, pristine, nothing like the well-loved toys Jessica had carefully chosen. Lily? Jessica's voice shook. Baby, it's Mommy. The little girl looked up, her face scrunched in confusion. Who's that lady? Jessica's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Lily, sweetheart, it's Mommy. Don't you remember? The social worker intervened gently. Lily, this is your mother. Remember Mommy? My mommy's at home, with Daddy and Nessa. Nessa? Jessica whispered. The door opened. Marcus stood there, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad. Concerned father, devoted husband, all performance. Sorry to interrupt, he said smoothly. Lily was asking for me. Lily ran to him immediately. Daddy, I want to go home. Marcus scooped her up, planting a kiss on her head while maintaining eye contact with Jessica, claiming territory. The doctor said this might happen, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Memory issues in toddlers when routines are disrupted. Maybe with time. He leaned close, whispering so only Jessica could hear. She calls Vanessa Mama now. Forgot you in 9 days. Sign the divorce papers. Let me go. I'll give you supervised visits once a month. Never. Then you'll never see her again. The social worker was already ushering them out, citing Lily's separation anxiety. Jessica watched through a window as her daughter skipped to Marcus's car, holding Vanessa's hand, looking happy and adjusted, like Jessica had never existed. She collapsed on the floor of the visitation center, and this time when the tears came, they didn't stop. 8 months pregnant, broken leg, no money, no home, no daughter. Jessica sat on a bench in Queens that night, rain soaking through her clothes. She'd walked from the subway station, nowhere else to go. In her pocket was a bottle of pills she'd taken from Aunt Margaret's medicine cabinet. The East River looked dark and infinite. Maybe Mitchell was right. Maybe some battles you couldn't win. Her phone rang. Frank, she almost didn't answer. But muscle memory made her thumb hit the button. Jesse? Frank's voice was slurred. Wrong. Jessica, I'm at St. Vincent's ER. I drank. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And with those words, Jessica realized she had a choice. She could join her mother in giving up, or she could fight. She looked at the pills in her hand, then threw them into the river. Marines don't leave Marines behind, I mentioned. Frank had said that once. Even if that Marine was broken. Even if they'd failed each other. Even if the whole world was burning. Jessica stood up, flagged down a cab with her last $20, and headed to St. Vincent's Hospital. The battle wasn't over yet. St. Vincent's emergency room smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Jessica found Frank in a curtained bay, hooked to an IV, his face gray and hollow. An older man sat beside him, early 60s, kind eyes, wearing an AA medallion on his jacket. You must be Jessica, the man said quietly. I'm Robert, your father's sponsor. He called me before taking the first drink. That's growth, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Jessica sank into the chair on Frank's other side. Her leg throbbed. Her whole body ached. But seeing her father like this, broken and ashamed, hurt worse than any physical pain. Frank's eyes opened. I failed you. Again, just like your mother. Yeah, Jessica said, surprising herself with her honesty. You did. I drank because I couldn't fix this. Because I'm useless. You'd be better off without— Stop, Jessica's voice was firm. You drank because you're an alcoholic. Mom drank herself to death. I have PTSD. We're broken people, Dad, a whole family of broken people. But maybe broken is okay if we're broken together. Frank's hand found hers. I don't know how to save you. Maybe you can't. Maybe I have to save myself, she paused, letting the truth of it settle in. But I can't do it alone. Marines don't leave Marines behind, Frank whispered. Even broken ones? Especially broken ones. They sat in silence, father and daughter, two survivors of different wars finally admitting they needed each other. The curtain rustled. Vanessa Cole stood there, still in her red dress from 3 days ago, looking exhausted and almost human. Get out, Jessica said flatly. I have a way to end this, tonight. Frank straightened despite his ivy. We're done helping your operation. Vanessa pulled out a letter, time-stamped 2 hours ago. I resigned from the FBI. I'm out. Why? Jessica asked. Because I watched your daughter call me mommy, and I felt— Vanessa's voice cracked. Nothing. No guilt. I liked it. I've been undercover so long, I forgot what real looks like. She met Jessica's eyes. You reminded me. Jessica studied her, this woman who'd destroyed her life, and saw something unexpected. Genuine remorse. Richard Hartford has a vault, Vanessa continued. Physical files on everyone he controls. Get those files, we expose the whole network. Marcus goes down, Richard goes down. You get Lily back. How? Frank asked. Marcus is throwing his post-Thanksgiving party Saturday. 200 guests, security spread thin. I can get you on catering staff, but you'd have to pretend to be strangers. Jessica looked at her leg cast. I can barely walk. Then you'll have to sell it. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Jessica surprised herself. I'm in. Frank stared at her. Jess, I'm done being a victim, Dad. Either we fight or we roll over and die, and I'm not ready to die yet. Vanessa nodded. Saturday, 6 p.m., Hartford Estate in Connecticut. Wear black. Look forgettable. She left as quietly as she'd arrived. Robert, Frank's sponsor, cleared his throat. That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the craziest. Possibly both. Probably both, Jessica agreed. They discharged Frank that morning with stern warnings and follow-up appointments he'd probably keep. Jessica helped him to her aunt's house, where Margaret had prepared the guest room with clean sheets and hopeful determination. The next 2 days were a blur of planning. Vanessa sent encrypted messages with floor plans, guard rotations, security codes. Frank drilled Jessica on how to move with crutches without drawing attention, how to blend into backgrounds, how to think like someone who'd spent decades in combat zones. You were a war correspondent, Frank reminded her. You survived Fallujah. You can survive this. Fallujah was different. At least there I knew who the enemy was. The enemy's the same everywhere, Frank said. People who think power gives them permission to hurt others. Saturday arrived too quickly. Jessica dressed in black pants and a plain shirt, pulled her hair into a bun, wore cheap glasses Vanessa had provided. She looked like 1,000 other caterers in New York. Anonymous, forgettable. Frank wore kitchen whites. A sous chef, his forged documents said. The FBI had provided them, even if Vanessa was officially resigned. They rode to Connecticut in silence. The Hartford estate loomed like something out of a movie. Colonial mansion, manicured grounds, money radiating from every brick. 200 guests in evening wear. Jessica served champagne on crutches, playing the recovering worker. Nobody looked at her twice. Rich people had a talent for not seeing the help. Frank worked in the kitchen, prepping garnishes, keeping his head down. Through hidden earpieces, they communicated in Marine shorthand. Eyes on Richard, second floor, study. Copy that. Jessica maneuvered through the crowd, catching glimpses of her old life. Marcus holding court with senators and CEOs. Vanessa on his arm, playing the devoted girlfriend. And through an upstairs window, Lily with a nanny, playing with toys that Jessica's daughter didn't recognize. It took everything in Jessica not to break cover, to run upstairs and grab her daughter and run. Stay focused, Frank's voice through the earpiece. We get the files, we get her back. Richard Hartford appeared on the grand staircase. 68 years old, silver-haired, commanding. Everyone deferred to him like some kind of king. To family, Richard's voice carried across the room. To loyalty, to the Hartford legacy. Jessica served him champagne, close enough to hear his conversation with the senator. Shipment clears customs Tuesday. Your confirmation makes it legal. And my daughter's college fund? Already transferred to Cayman's account, untraceable. Arms dealing, right here, openly discussed, because these people thought they were untouchable. Vanessa created the distraction. A convincing allergic reaction, gasping for breath, needing her EpiPen from upstairs. Security escorted her up, leaving the hallway to the vault temporarily exposed. Frank moved fast. Jessica kept watch. Behind a bookshelf, code entered. The vault door opened. Files. Hundreds of manila folders with names that would make the evening news for months. Judges, congressmen, FBI agents, police chiefs. Everyone Richard owned, documented in ink. Frank photographed everything with a button camera, live streaming to FBI servers Vanessa had arranged. Then he found a folder labeled Jessica Hartford, Leverage. Inside were photos from Iraq, medical records, fake psychiatric evaluations, staged photos making her look unstable. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years. 45 seconds, Jessica whispered. Frank grabbed the folder, closed the vault, security returning. Frank slipped back to the kitchen with seconds to spare. They met in a pantry, both breathing hard. They planned everything, Jessica stared at the folder. The assault, the psychiatric hold, all of it. We have evidence now. This goes to the FBI. No, it doesn't, Vanessa's voice came from the doorway. She was holding a gun. Frank reached for his concealed weapon, but Vanessa was faster. Hands where I can see them, Colonel. I'm 28 and trained by Mossad. You're 62 with arthritis. Jessica's world tilted again. Another betrayal, always another betrayal. I lied, Vanessa said. I'm not FBI. Never was. I work for Richard, always have. She pulled out an FBI badge. This? Prop. The whole undercover story? Script. You really think the FBI would let an active agent get pregnant by a target? Frank's recording, Jessica started. Was it? Or did someone spike his coffee with vodka to make him relapse? Vanessa's smile was cold. You people are so easy to manipulate. Give you tiny bits of hope, watch you scramble. She spoke into her radio. Target secured. Bring Mr. Hartford. Richard entered with guards, looking unsurprised, almost bored. You should have signed the papers, dear, he said to Jessica. Made this much easier. The gun was pointed at them. The evidence was about to be destroyed. And through the doorway, Jessica could see Lily in her princess nightgown, coming to investigate the noise. Daddy, I heard voices, Marcus appeared, scooping Lily up. Just some bad people, princess. Go back to Nanny. Lily saw Jessica. That's the sad lady from the hospital. No, sweetheart. That lady's sick. She thinks she's your mommy, very sad. Lily looked at Jessica with pity. You should take medicine, then you won't be sick. Marcus carried her away, and Jessica realized they were going to die here, in this mansion. Vanessa would take them to the woods, make it look like murder-suicide. Unstable vet and his PTSD daughter. Richard confirmed it. Take them to the woods, make it look natural. Frank tried to bluff. I uploaded everything to a dead man's switch. Doesn't hear from me in 2 hours. No, you didn't, Richard smiled. You're a grunt, not a spook. You don't think like that. Frank's silence confirmed the truth. They were led outside at gunpoint, into the woods, 200 yards from the mansion. This was how it ended. Not with justice, with execution. Jessica stumbled on her crutches, fell to her knees. Just do it. I'm done. Jess, don't. Frank tried. I lost her, Dad. She doesn't even know me. What's the point? Vanessa stopped walking. The point is, you don't quit. What? Frank turned. Vanessa lowered the gun. I said you don't quit. And pulled out a different badge. Different ID number. Real FBI. Everything I said to Richard? Lies. I am FBI. Everything after that parking lot meeting with Frank? I was working with you. Behind them, the Hartford estate exploded. Not literally, but floodlights erupted. Helicopters overhead. Tactical teams emerging from woods. FBI hostage rescue team. Breach, breach, breach. Vanessa spoke into her real radio. Go, go, go. Jessica looked at Frank. Frank looked at Vanessa. Your reactions had to be real, Vanessa explained quickly. Richard can smell fake emotion. We needed him to confess, to order our execution. Witnessed, recorded. Agent Kate Williams appeared, leading the tactical team. Colonel Bishop, your military contacts came through. DOD liaison confirmed the arms dealing. We have everything. The raid was surgical. Richard Hartford in handcuffs. Marcus Hartford trying to run, tackled by agents. Agent Williams handed Jessica an arrest warrant. Would you like to do the honors, Mrs. Hartford? Jessica limped to Marcus, now restrained and furious. She read clearly, Marcus Hartford, you're under arrest for conspiracy, domestic violence, child endangerment, fraud. You'll never get her back, Marcus snarled. Lily thinks you're crazy. She'll never love you. Jessica slapped him. Hard. That's for my leg. Slapped him again. That's for Lily. Then walked away without looking back. A nanny brought Lily out, scared and crying. Jessica knelt carefully. Lily, it's okay. You're safe. Where's Daddy? Daddy has to go away for a while. Lily studied Jessica's face. Recognition flickered. You're the lady from my dreams. Jessica's tears came then. Real ones. Yeah, baby, I'm the lady from your dreams. Lily touched Jessica's face. You have sad eyes, like me. Yeah, sweetheart, like you. And as federal agents loaded the Hartfords into vehicles, as Vanessa coordinated evidence collection, as Frank wrapped his arms around his daughter and granddaughter, Jessica realized something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the survivor. And survivors didn't quit. 1 year later, Jessica sat in a Senate hearing room, facing cameras broadcasting to every news channel in America. The room was packed. Journalists, victims advocates, families of people who died because of Hartford technology used by foreign regimes. The senator leading the inquiry, a stern woman from Massachusetts, reviewed her notes before speaking. Mrs. Hartford, or should I say Ms. Bishop, as you've legally returned to your maiden name, thank you for testifying today. This committee is investigating how Hartford security systems sold military-grade surveillance technology to sanctioned nations. Can you describe your knowledge of these activities during your marriage? Jessica's hands rested on the table, steady despite her racing heart. She'd spent months preparing for this. Therapy twice a week, practiced testimony with prosecutors, learning to tell her story without falling apart. Senator, I knew my husband was cruel. I didn't know he was a traitor. The words landed like bombs. Reporters typed frantically. Please describe the events of November 23rd of last year. Jessica took a breath. My husband broke my leg because I confronted his mistress. While I was 7 months pregnant, in front of our 2-year-old daughter and my father. She paused, making sure every word was clear. But what he did to me is nothing compared to what his technology did overseas. Hartford surveillance systems track dissidents in Syria, Iran, North Korea. People are dead because of what he sold. Marcus's defense attorney, an expensive shark in an expensive suit, stood. Ms. Bishop, isn't it true you have been diagnosed with PTSD, that you've been hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation? Yes, Jessica said steadily. And you've taken anti-anxiety medication? Yes, after my husband assaulted me and had me committed to prevent me from getting surgery for my broken leg. The attorney tried another angle. But you also attempted suicide in 2013, correct? I had survivor's guilt after my press crew was killed by an IED in Fallujah. 3 of my colleagues died. I got help. I survived. I'm still standing. Jessica leaned forward slightly. Can Marcus say the same? Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Marcus took the stand after her. He played it perfectly. Broken man, childhood trauma, anger issues from an abusive father. Some jury members looked sympathetic. I loved her, Marcus said, his voice cracking. I never meant to hurt her. I'm sick. I need help, not prison. Jessica watched him perform, this man she'd once loved, and felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just a cold observation of a predator trying one last manipulation. The prosecutor stood. Mr. Hartford, do you recognize this recording? The audio played clearly through the speakers. Marcus and Richard discussing Jessica's planned accident. When can we do it? Marcus's voice. After the baby's born. Postpartum depression makes perfect, however. Richard's voice. What about the father? Car accident, drunk driving, believable. The courtroom erupted. Marcus's lawyer objected, but the recording was legal, obtained with a warrant during the FBI raid. Marcus's face drained of color. That's out of context. Context? The prosecutor's voice was sharp. You plan to murder your wife and make it look like suicide. That's not context, that's premeditated murder. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Richard Hartford, 60 years federal prison for arms trafficking, RICO violations, conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus Hartford, 35 years federal prison for domestic violence, conspiracy to commit murder, export control violations, child endangerment. Jessica sat in the gallery between Frank and Diane as the verdicts were read. She didn't cheer, didn't cry, just sat quietly as justice finally arrived. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Was on. Bishop, how do you feel? What's next for you? Will you write a book? Jessica stood at the microphone, Frank and Diane flanking her, and spoke clearly. I want every woman who's been silenced to know something. Your truth matters. No one has the right to take your voice, your safety, or your dignity. You can stand up. You can fight back. I did, and I survived. The crowd erupted in applause. Women in the audience cried, and Jessica realized that her story, as painful as it was, had become something bigger than her. It had become hope. 2 years after Thanksgiving, Jessica had rebuilt a life. Not the one she'd lost, but something new, something real. She lived in a small house in Stamford, Connecticut. Modest, safe, with a yard where Lily could play. Frank lived there too, helping raise both Lily and Jessica's son, Frank Jr., named after the grandfather who'd saved them. Jessica had returned to journalism, writing investigative pieces for the Washington Post. Her byline, Jessica Bishop, appeared on stories about domestic violence, violence and corporate corruption, the intersection of power and abuse. Her book, The War at Home, became a bestseller. The advance and settlement from Hartford assets totaled $12 million. Jessica kept enough to live on, donated the rest to a victims fund, but the victory came with permanent. His Lily, now 4, didn't remember anything before age 3. The trauma had erased those years. She had night terrors 3 to 4 times a week, saw a child therapist twice weekly, was afraid of men with deep voices because they reminded her of Marcus. Last week, she'd asked Jessica, Mommy, why don't I have a daddy like other kids? And Jessica had no good answer. Jessica herself carried scars. The permanent limp from surgery delayed too long. Chronic pain that flared up when it rained. PTSD that now included domestic violence triggers alongside war trauma. Panic attacks when men raise their voices. She hadn't dated in 2 years. Couldn't imagine trusting someone that way again. Frank Jr., born healthy despite everything, had been difficult to bond with initially. Jessica's postpartum depression, complicated by PTSD, meant Frank Sr. had done most of the early childcare. That guilt still haunted Jessica at 3 a.m. Frank Sr. was over 1,000 days sober now, attended AA daily, sponsored 3 other veterans. But the bullet wound from Afghanistan acted up, requiring a cane on bad days. And sometimes Jessica found him in the garage at night, drinking non-alcoholic beer alone, crying quietly. I'm not drinking, he'd say when she found him. I just miss feeling numb. Diane had left her own abusive relationship, inspired by Jessica's fight. She was doing well now, but admitted, "I lost 5 years I can't get back." Victory was real, but incomplete. Still, on the third Thanksgiving after everything fell apart, Jessica's small house filled with people who mattered. Not a performance, not Instagram perfect, just real. Diane and her twin boys. Dr. Rachel Stevens, the ER physician who'd become a friend. Vanessa Cole, surprisingly, who'd earned Jessica's grudging respect, if not quite friendship. 3 women from Jessica's survivor support group. Frank made terrible dad jokes while cooking. Lily taught Frank Jr. how to stack blocks. Kids played too loud, made messes, laughed with the unself-conscious joy of children who felt safe. Mid-dinner, Lily asked the question Jessica had been dreading. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" The table went silent. Jessica's hands shook, reaching for her water glass. Frank intervened gently. "Lily, your daddy made bad choices. He's not here." "Is he dead?" Lily asked with a child's bluntness. Jessica forced herself to be honest. "No, baby, he's alive. But he can't be with us because he hurt people." "Did he hurt you?" "Yes." Lily processed this, then returned to her macaroni and cheese. "Then I'm glad he's not here." Adults exchanged looks. Children's resilience was both heartbreaking and hopeful. After the kids went to bed, after the guests left, after the dishes were done, the doorbell rang. Certified mail, a letter from FCI Coleman Federal Prison, from Marcus Hartford. Jessica's hands shook holding it. "Want me to burn it?" Diane offered. "No, I need to see what he has to say." She opened it alone in her bedroom, Frank waiting downstairs in case she needed him. The letter was handwritten, Marcus's perfect penmanship. "Jessica, I think about that Thanksgiving every day. The sound your leg made, Lily screaming, your father's face. Prison therapy makes me confront what I was. My father's weapon. He molded me to be him. I never learned to be anything else. I don't ask forgiveness. I don't deserve breath, let alone mercy. I'm writing because our son will ask about me someday. Tell him his father was broken by a broken man. Tell him you were strong enough to break the cycle. Tell him you saved his life by leaving mine. I know sorry means nothing when you've destroyed everything, but it's all I have left. I hope you're happy. I mean that." And Jessica read it twice, then took out a pen and wrote on the back, "I forgive you, not for you, not for me, for Lily and Frank Jr., so they can see that hate ends." She folded it, sealed the envelope, addressed it, then walked downstairs to the fireplace. "You're not sending it?" Frank asked. "He doesn't need my forgiveness," Jessica said, watching the letter catch fire. "I do." The paper curled and blackened, becoming ash. "Some letters are just for us," Jessica whispered. Frank put his arm around her shoulders, and they watched the flames together. Later, Jessica tucked Lily and Frank Jr. into bed. "Tell the princess story," Lily demanded. "Once upon a time, there was a princess who everyone thought needed rescuing. But she saved herself," Lily finished triumphantly. "That's right, baby." And she learned something important. "What?" "That being broken doesn't mean you're defeated. It means you're real." "Lil Aunid, was the princess you?" Jessica kissed her forehead. "The princess is you, sweetheart, and you're going to be okay." She found Frank downstairs doing dishes, humming an old Marine hymn. "You okay?" he asked. Jessica looked around, at the modest home, at the photos on the wall, real moments, not performances, at the safety they'd built from ruins. "Yeah, Dad, for the first time in years. I really am." They stood together at the sink, father and daughter, 2 Marines who'd survived their separate wars and found peace on the other side. Through the window, Manhattan skyline was visible in the distance. Jessica didn't look at it. She looked at her family instead. Outside, snow began to fall over Connecticut. Inside, Jessica Bishop finally understood that freedom wasn't about revenge or perfect endings. It was about choosing to keep living, keep loving, keep fighting. One day at a time. 5 years later, the courtroom was different this time. Smaller. State court, not federal. But the woman on the witness stand looked familiar. Same terrified expression Jessica remembered wearing. Same trembling hands. Same voice that kept breaking as she testified about her husband's violence. Jessica sat in the gallery, not as a witness, but as a supporter. She'd gotten the call from the prosecutor that morning. There's a woman testifying today. She read your book, asked if you could be there. So Jessica came. The woman, Amanda, 32, two kids, struggled through her testimony. Her husband's defense attorney was brutal, attacking her credibility, questioning her memory, suggesting she was exaggerating. Amanda's voice got smaller with each question. She was folding in on herself, losing the battle. Then she looked up, saw Jessica in the gallery. Their eyes met, and something shifted. Amanda sat up straighter. Her voice grew stronger. "No," she said firmly to the defense attorney, "that's not what happened. I'm telling you exactly what happened. And you can try to twist my words all you want, but I know the truth. I lived it." The judge ruled in her favor an hour later. Protective order granted. Full custody awarded. Outside the courthouse, Amanda found Jessica on the steps. "Thank you," Amanda said, tears streaming. "I saw you sitting there, and I remembered what you wrote, that survivors don't quit." Jessica hugged her gently. "You did the hard part. You survived. Everything else is just details." They stood on the courthouse steps, two women connected by the painful sisterhood of survival, and Jessica realized this was the real victory. Not the courtroom drama, not the verdicts or the settlements. The victory was in moments like this, one survivor giving strength to another, breaking the cycle, proving that the darkness didn't win. Jessica walked away from the courthouse, headed back to her car. The late afternoon sun caught her reflection in the glass building across the street. But in that reflection, she saw something impossible. Hundreds of women behind her. Some she recognized from her support group. Others were strangers, all survivors, all standing together. It was a trick of the light, of course, or maybe not. Maybe it was the truth made visible, that no survivor ever fights alone, that every woman who stands up makes it easier for the next one to stand. Jessica smiled at her reflection and kept walking forward. The cycle breaks when we decide it breaks. And Jessica Bishop had decided.